Hey all, we're in session 3 of a 5-session series in which we are wrestling together with some of the big questions people have about faith, about God, and about the Bible. In our last session, we asked the question, what do we do about the violence in the Bible? If you missed that one, I want you to go back. I want you to check it out. But today, I want you to think back to when you were in elementary school. For some of you, that's a long time ago. Think back to your first science class. Somewhere along the way in science class, you learned that humans and animals were formed through a process of evolution, where over many generations, species of animals slowly adapted and changed their physical characteristics, and they eventually evolved into humans. You learned about the Big Bang Theory, that the universe began at just a single point in time. Now, at the same time, if you grew up in church, while you were learning all of this in school at church, I'm guessing you learned about the story of Genesis, that God created the world in just, you know how many days? 7 days. So our question for today is this: can I be a Christian and believe in both evolution and science? In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." We know this story, right? And it was just 6 days later in Genesis chapter 2 where we heard these words: "The heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." Now, many of us learned this in Sunday school, but how do we reconcile the story of Genesis with all we know in science and everything we know about evolution? The question for today is this: can I be a Christian and believe also in evolution and in science? And here's the deal. That question is actually a question that has more to do with how we interpret the Bible than it has to do with science or creation. Now, let me explain. Different people read or interpret the Bible in all kinds of different kinds of ways. There's a fancy word for this. It's called hermeneutics. It's the lens through which you read the Bible. Now, let me give you an image here. Imagine taking a picture with your phone. On your phone, you have all these filters you can put on that picture. The filter you use can change how the picture looks. Sometimes it can change it dramatically. Similarly, your life experiences, they can affect your interpretation of the Bible, or what is called your biblical hermeneutic. Everyone has a hermeneutic. Your life has influenced you to read the Bible from a certain perspective. Now, that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's just reality. And it's something we all need to pay attention to whenever we open the Bible. Now, some people, they use what is called a literal approach to interpret the Bible. Someone using a literal interpretation as their approach to the Bible would read the creation story in Genesis chapter 1, and they would likely come to the conclusion that the world was created by God in 7 days, 7 24-hour periods. There are others, though, that might use another biblical hermeneutic. They might take a figurative approach to interpreting the Bible. Someone using a figurative interpretation approach would take the stance that some stories in the Bible may not be based on real historical events, but were created to make a point about God. This is what Jesus did all the time when he would share parables. The stories Jesus told were made up, but they pointed to a greater truth about God. A figurative interpretation of Genesis 1, the story of creation, might see the story of creation as a poetic story of God's creation of the world that was never intended to be scientifically accurate. The truth is, the writers of the Bible, they weren't scientists. They were a mix of poets, prophets, and historians. And because of that, the Bible was never meant to be taken 100% literally. Instead, when we read the Bible, we should ask ourselves, what did the author want to reveal to us about the love of God? When it comes to the creation story, here's my hunch. The author wanted us to know that just like that Sunday school song, God's got the whole world in God's hands. Our question for today is this: can you be a Christian and believe in evolution and science? The answer is you bet. It all depends on your hermeneutic. So as we close today, I want to give you a couple of questions to chew on. Did you grow up thinking that the story of Genesis and evolution were opposed to one another? And secondly, how were you taught to read the Bible? With a literal hermeneutic or maybe more of a figurative approach? Gang, thanks so much for joining me today. I can't wait for our next session when we'll discuss our next question in this series. Is it wrong to doubt God?